Good afternoon. It is with great pleasure that I introduce today's distinguished guest, Dr. Mehdi Bozorgmehr, who came to us all the way from New York City. He's a professor of sociology at City College and at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York, which, by the way, is the best university in the United States. Our guest is the founding co-director of the Middle East and Middle Eastern American Center at the Graduate Center. He is also the founding deputy director of the master's program in Middle Eastern Studies at the Graduate Center. So he is a distinguished leader in developing centers to disseminate knowledge on a very important topic. He is also an award-winning author. His book, Backlash, 9/11, Middle Eastern and Muslim Americans Respond, has won an award. He's also won an award for a book called Ethnic Los Angeles, which is an important book to us. He is also the foremost specialist on Iranian Americans and one of the pioneers to work on Middle Eastern Americans. So it is with great pleasure that I welcome Professor.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And that is the problem, the challenge for us to try to address. The challenge is that you have a sort of a paradox in American academia, and that is the Near East centers, like the one that Jonathan headed forever at UCLA. Are literally barred from addressing, the Middle Eastern Americans. They're international studies programs. They're funded by Title VI. Funding is dwindling pretty rapidly, but nevertheless, they're literally prohibited from having anything on the U.S. So they really need to address international issues. Therefore, the population sort of falls by the wayside there. On the other hand, the ethnic studies do not include Middle Eastern experience because ethnic studies follow, the OMB division, and they're based on official classification of legal minorities. So if you think about the racial pentagon in the U.S., whites, Asian Americans, Latinos, African Americans, and American Indians, there's no room for Middle Easterns anywhere, right? In fact, it's white studies, but there's no Middle East studies. And white studies don't really generally include the Middle East experience since they're not white enough. So the issue there, therefore, they fall between cracks. If you think about it, ethnic studies don't cover them, area studies don't cover them, so who's going to cover them, right? And in a way, actually, and ironically, a lot of people who are coming through the ranks of these communities, like myself, like many of you here, we are interested in our own experiences, right? And moreover, many of us cannot go back to the Middle East to do research. I reminded Professor Sabah, my advisor who directed the center for many years and worked very closely with George, when I told him that I, like every other Iranian at the time, I wanted to go and study the Iranian Revolution in Iran. He said, do you want to become famous dead or alive? So I got the message from him right there and then, which suggested that I really need to do something. And one of the reasons I came to UCLA from San Diego, not very far, certainly not as far as Fresno, but was to sort of have a secondary possible topic. I was reminded by one of my advisors said that you don't ever have one topic for dissertation, have several in case one doesn't pan out. I mean, it's sort of an issue of feasibility. So, and I thought that if nothing else, I can also study the Iranian community in Los Angeles. Lo and behold, that turned out to be much more possible project than actually going to Iran and doing this. And in some ways, actually more novel because very few people were studying the community here. Most everybody was studying the revolution. After all, we were all preoccupied, obsessed. Some of us still are, right, in the Iranian revolution. Right reasons. So therefore, we started actually looking at, and I think in that sense, it's kind of interesting because while the centers may not be open to this idea, nor for that matter the ethnic studies programs, but actually research foundations are. And in fact, that's what really the genesis of my work is that we started thinking about the Iranian community in LA. At that time, really hardly any study had been done on that. So we wanted to do a sort of a baseline study, and we went to the National Science Foundation, with the idea to do a project because our argument was that this is a very heterogeneous community along ethno-religious lines, and while there are some data available on the population and census, but the data does not make it, there's no data on religion in the census, so therefore, we will not know about these differences, for instance, between Armenians, between Jews, Baha'is, and Muslims, and other groups. So that's where we suggested that because there's no studies done on them, we really need to do a survey, a probability survey, random sampling, and we got funded, I think it was 86. I don't want to admit how old I am, but I guess at some point it comes through. So that we sort of got this funding, and we did a project where we interviewed about 700 households here, and we did some papers from that. And then at that time, of course, I was very interested in sort of following this line, and I was given a chance to offer a course in sociology at UCLA in the social department. Of course, I had to teach a bread and butter course, a jumbo intro with 365 students, and that was the exploitation. But then I sort of returned the favor and exploited them by offering a small seminar on Middle Eastern Americans. And because the course was offered through sociology, there was no problem. You see, if that course could not have been offered through the Middle East Center, or would not have been offered through ethnic studies. It was a sociology course, so they said, oh, okay, you can do whatever you want. So I offered that course, and also I sort of then we started. I interviewed, I applied for a job in New York. Actually, the person who held the job came to UCLA. So Roger Waldninger. So I went to his office one day and I said, Roger, they're advertising your job. He said, do you want to apply? I said, not in my lifetime. He said, well, you should think about it. So I thought about it, and I said, well, it's a job. It's in the other end of the country. It's not LA, right? At that time, it wasn't matter was to be in LA or California. But I said I applied. I applied, and then they got some interest. They were interested, and I went out for an interview, and then they offered me the job, but I dragged my feet as long as possible before going there. It was actually literally 2 years. And during that time, I sort of finally got a letter from one of my colleagues that, do you really want this job? Because if you don't, there are other people who want it, and they're in the wings, and including the guy who did not get the job. So I decided I have to go in '95. But before I went, when I finished my dissertation, and I had some time to kill afterwards, I worked with actually Roger Waldninger in this book, Los Angeles, that we talked about. And again, I got my 2 cents in as a co-editor and got a chapter on Middle Easterners in there. After all, you can't do a book on LA, ethnic LA, and not have a chapter on the Middle East. But if I were not there, it would have happened, right? So that's another reason why I think it's important that we get involved and we sort of get our voices heard, and we also sort of managed to address the experience of our group. And in fact, you'd be amused at this, because when I subsequently came back in the summers, it took me a long, long time. Somebody before we were talking said, you've adjusted very well. And they were saying you've adjusted well, because adjustment is never complete. It's like leaving California is never easy. It's like the Eagles, song, Hotel California. You can check out anytime, but you can never leave. So, I was going back and forth all the time. And in fact, I was spending my summers here, my Christmas here. So my expenses were going. It's not easy to be a bi-coastal academic. Movie stars can do it, but academics cannot. So I had to start teaching, and I taught in the summer at UCLA. And I actually taught a course on immigration. And lo and behold, when I assigned this book, actually, interestingly, my students generally sort of complimented the chapter on Middle Eastern. They said, well, I'm an ethnic studies student, and nobody ever talks about this group. Or I'm, Asian American student, study student. But I don't, so it was kind of an interesting issue that you would think that they would be more sort of, responsive to the chapter that dealt with their own groups, but that was not the case. So then when I went out there, and again, sort of, I hope this doesn't come across as being too sort of self-congratulatory, but it really is in the spirit of sharing to see how you can possibly maybe sort of go in that direction, because I think it's a very, very novel and original idea. And one of the things that I thought about doing was that when I got there, and it happened that one of my former classmates, and actually a housemate, Beth Barron, was also in the system there. She was teaching there, and we sort of started talking, and we said that this is really interesting. We have about over 20 campuses here, We have, at that time, something like close to 50 faculty, who do the Middle East, but we don't have a center. So it was a real dilemma for us, like in a sense, like what you have here. There's UCLA is there, right? And for me, NYU was there, or Columbia was there, but it was not my home institute, And in fact, New York is a much more democratic place academically than LA is. It's not, as long as you're a card-carrying member of the academia, you're welcome everywhere. You can never, they won't say, well, it's from City College, you're Columbia University. There's not that kind of stratification that unfortunately sometimes exists in LA. You don't get there. So at first I was going to NYU for my Middle East fix, and I was going to the New School for my immigration fix. I lived in the village, sort of straddled, the two. But then we thought that we really should do something at CUNY, City University of New York, and so we started actually with a Middle East program at City College, which was our home campus. With Darren and I both were there. And at that time, when we did that, we had like a dozen faculty or so. We got a small grant, like $8,000 or something. This is CUNY after all. So and we got that off the ground. And then subsequently, we wanted to sort of apply for an external grant. And I remember before I left, Ford Foundation had a very, very interesting initiative called Crossing Borders, where they were really trying to bridge the gap between ethnic studies and area studies. So they were encouraging work on Latin Americans and Latin America, or Asian Americans and Asia, or Asian diaspora. And in fact, the grant had run out by the time that I got there. But we approached the program officer and we said that we want to do something like that. We want to do something about the Middle East and the diaspora. And she said, well, the grant has run out, but for these outfits, they have so much money. They had actually so much money now. The stocks market crash, but not that well to do. But they said that we can perhaps entertain a proposal, with the discretionary fund that we have. So we applied and we got a grant to establish a Middle East and Middle Eastern American Center, we called it. And we decided to house that at the Graduate Center because it is a central location. It is a PhD sort of granting wing of the university system there, and it is the best university in the world. And that actually, in a way, just like Mehdi was talking about, our hands were not tied because we were not a federally funded Title VI National Resource Center. We could do whatever we wanted to do, so we started this program. And then, of course, when we wanted to apply subsequently, and it's something that you may want to consider, remember we were dealing with this Title VI, when you want to go to apply for Title VI grant, which is the undergraduate version, and that would be very appropriate for CSUN to consider, because it is geared towards the undergraduate education, is that we just basically sort of did, the search and replace. Every time it was American, it was just replaced with diaspora. Now, once you squeeze that in, then you really are kind of like home free in a sense, and we dealt with this issue of sort of the Middle Eastern diaspora. So, in a way, I think, and then I've continued teaching this course. I actually right now teach a graduate course where I sent the syllabus here, which could easily be adjusted or tailored to the undergrads. But I think what is really interesting is that this kind of focus, which is really unique. In other words, Columbia, NYU, other schools, Princeton, Yale, they don't really do this as much. Of course, the field is changing now. Now they're catching on after 9/11. A lot of people are getting interested. A lot of faculty are out there who are doing this thing, and that is sort of a big draw for us, And our lectures are in the evening because we sort of want to cater to the community. We average about 70 people per lecture. We have at least a lecture a week, sometimes 2 a week. So it's really sort of become very, very productive, and in fact what is really nice is that, as we see here, a lot of people from the community come and share. So I wanted to kind of use that as a background, perhaps to sort of introduce what you're up to, and then maybe I wanted to sort of ask your ideas or perhaps entertain some questions because I don't want you to, so I don't want to lose you in a sense in the process. So, and then if you want, I can talk a little bit more substantively.